I'm Rosalie Osmond, and I'm going to read two short passages from my most recent novel, Broken Symmetry, which has been nominated for the Jim Connors Dartmouth Book Award. Broken Symmetry is a story about family, a rather strange family consisting of two brothers married to two sisters, who live on either side of a central hallway in a single house. Now, this might be difficult in any case, but it becomes more difficult when one and only one couple has a child. Emma stands holding her small daughter up to the light. Multicolored, it slants through the stained glass transom above the oak front door in rays of purple, green, and rose. Grapes, leaves, and flowers supporting scrolls, dyeing the child's white smocked dress. She strains in her mother's arms to touch the warm glass, to feel the streaming colors. Pretty, pretty. Emma's arms ache. Gently, she puts Eleanor down into the pool of colored light on the polished birch floor. Surrounded by toys, some nesting cups, a cloth book, a small stuffed bear. It is still the light that absorbs the child as she sits moving her hands to make shadow patterns in the brightness around her. Emma leaves her there and goes back to the kitchen to make the cake for her first birthday. It must be, like her daughter, perfect. The stained glass window is the one touch of opulence in the wooden clapboard house, as if the sea captain who built it 100 years ago allowed himself this alone to compensate for the Spartan life on shipboard. Everything else is as plain and functional as a mind centered on eternal rather than temporal reward could wish. The house is almost silent now. In one kitchen, Emma shakes a flour sifter and scrapes a spoon across a bowl. In the opposite kitchen, her sister, Virtue, rubbing her rolling pin along the pastry board, lets out a muffled sigh. Suddenly, there comes a high-pitched cry from Eleanor. Both run, but Virtue gets there first, scoops up the screaming child, and sticks a finger in her mouth. Attack! Just look! She might have swallowed it. The wound is not severe. A pinprick to the tongue, a red drop staining the white dress. Still, Eleanor howls and Virtue coos and rocks her in her arms. Emma stands by, accused, alone. She reaches out for Eleanor, but Eleanor will have none of her. She hides her face in Virtue's shoulder, cries some more. Poor lamb, it's all right now. Then rage, pure rage. Give her to me. In a surge of fury, Emma wrests Eleanor from Virtue's grasp and bears her screaming to her own kitchen. She sinks into the wicker chair, tries to calm the frightened child, and tries to calm herself as well, as anger yields to guilt and shame. The rolling pin is active now across the hall, staccato on the wooden pastry board, and interspersed come imprecations that could be to the pastry or the gods, but that Emma knows are for herself. A nursery rhyme to blot it out, The Little Pigs. Eleanor, recovered now, nods and tugs at her socks and shoes so that her toes can be exposed. Virtue's voice fills the gap, antiphonal. This little pig, poor baby, went to market, too careless for words. This little pig thinks only of herself, stayed at home. My very own sister. Now I'm going to move on to a passage dealing with a slightly earlier period when Emma is pregnant and the sisters' lives begin to diverge. It was hot and sticky the summer Eleanor was born. Emma sat in a chair in the tiny garden reading books, Dickens and Trollope mostly. Virtue stayed in her kitchen, cooking pies, gingerbreads, cakes with elaborate decorations. Who ate them all, Emma couldn't imagine. Must be Obadiah. He was getting a bit of a paunch. One particularly hot day in late July, a man appeared in the garden. He walked purposefully up the alleyway between the barber shop and the house. Seeing Emma sitting in the garden, he halted his approach to the back door of the house and came towards her. "Mrs. Wenzel?" "Yes." He removed his hat. "I'm Mr. Curtis. I knocked out front but got no answer. The school board sent me." He stopped in confusion, focusing on Emma's stomach. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I guess they didn't know." He blushed. "You see, there's a shortage of teachers, and Mrs. Colback has just told us she's not coming back next year to go teach in garden lots. So we thought you might be able to help us out. But of course." "Well, yes, of course. I won't trouble you any more." He started to leave, then turned and said, "You don't know of anyone else who might be interested, do you?" To her amazement, Emma found she did. "Well, I don't know if she'd be interested, but my sister is a teacher as well. You could ask her." He perked up at once. "Now, where might I find her?" "She's just inside the house, in the kitchen, on the left. We share the house, you see. We married brothers, so Virtue is Mrs. Wenzel as well." Suddenly, this seemed like a shameful secret, an admission of an incestuous liaison. He knocked at the back door of the little house. Virtue appeared, wiping her floury hands on her apron. "Mrs. Wenzel, may I come in and speak to you a moment?" Emma could hear Virtue's fluster. "Well, I guess so, but I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm such a mess. My hair..." Meanwhile, she was opening the door and letting the man inside. They disappeared from view and from hearing. Virtue must have taken him into the living room at the front of the house. Emma tried to continue reading, but the book no longer held her interest. The baby moved. It hung heavily inside her, cramped, weighing her down. Having a baby, especially after all these years of trying, was such a splendid thing. But Emma thought of how happy she had been in the classroom, standing in front of the children, telling them new things, wonderful things they would never forget. Now Virtue would have a chance to do that once more. Of course, she would make a mess of it. The children would adore her, but Virtue would tell them that there never had been an ice age, that evolution was just an idea a few nutters held, and that asking why math problems were solved in a particular way was a waste of time. You just got on and memorized the method. But none of that could be helped. Half an hour passed. He's taking his good old time, thought Emma. Or maybe it's Virtue who's taking hers. The sun was too hot, but she couldn't go back into the house because that would look like snooping. She couldn't go into the barber shop. That would be improper for a woman in her condition. So she sat with the book on her lap and steamed gently. Eventually, Mr. Curtis emerged. He was smiling and waved a cheery goodbye to her as he left the garden. So, success? She went back into the cool semi-darkness of the kitchen and started thinking what to cook Nathan for supper. Virtue was back in her kitchen again, mixing something. Emma could hear the sound of the wooden spoon against the pottery bowl. Half an hour later, Virtue appeared at her kitchen door, leaned against the door frame, as was her custom, and said, "Guess what? They want me to teach school in garden lots." Emma was tempted to say, "No, they don't. They want me. But since I can't do it, they'll settle for you." She didn't. Instead, she inquired politely, "And will you?" "Well, of course, I'll have to ask Obadiah." "Of course. But if he doesn't mind, I just might." Thank you so very much for watching.